late blight. In the summer of 1845, a fungus-like organism called Phytophthora infestans slipped into Ireland aboard infected potato shipments, and within weeks turned entire fields of healthy green plants into blackened, rotting pulp. The pathogen attacks with terrifying speed, spreading spores through cool, damp air that infect leaves within hours and travel down into the tubers themselves, turning stored potatoes into a foul-smelling, disintegrating mush even after harvest. Because Ireland's population depended on a single potato variety for survival, the resulting famine killed roughly 1 million people and forced another million to emigrate. A demographic wound so deep that Ireland's population still has not recovered to its pre-famine size nearly 2 centuries later. What makes this pathogen especially chilling is that it never actually went away. The same disease still devastates potato and tomato crops on every inhabited continent today, and modern strains have grown more aggressive and more resistant to standard treatments than the 19th century lineage that started it all. Infected leaves develop dark, water-soaked blotches rimmed with a pale halo, and in humid weather a fine white fuzz of spores forms along the underside, spreading to every neighboring plant within a single rainy night. A whole field can collapse from first symptom to total blackened ruin in under 2 weeks under the right cool, wet conditions. A speed of destruction that left 19th century farmers with no way to save a crop once the infection had truly taken hold. Chestnut Blight. Before 1904, roughly 4 billion American chestnut trees dominated the eastern forests of North America, towering hardwoods so plentiful that entire regional economies were built around their rot-resistant lumber and reliable annual nut harvest. Then a fungus called Cryphonectria parasitica, accidentally imported on nursery stock from Asia, was spotted on trees in a New York zoo, and within 50 years it had killed more than 3 billion of those trees, reducing one of the most dominant species in the American forest canopy to little more than stunted, disease-ridden root sprouts. The fungus enters through wounds in the bark and grows in a spreading canker that girdles the trunk, cutting off the flow of water and nutrients until everything above the infection site dies, while the roots, ironically, often survive to send up new shoots that are themselves reinfected within a few years. Every one of Garden's Lab's videos digs this deep into how a single pathogen can reshape an entire ecosystem, with a new deep dive posted every few days for anyone who wants to understand exactly what is threatening the plants around them. Orange-brown cankers with a sunken, cracked texture spread visibly across the bark, and by the time the canker fully encircles a trunk, the tree above that point is already dead. Dutch Elm Disease. Named for the Dutch scientists who first studied it in the 1920s, this fungal disease actually originated in Asia and has since killed tens of millions of elm trees across Europe and North America, fundamentally reshaping the tree-lined streets of cities that once relied on elms for their iconic arching canopies. The fungus, carried from tree to tree by elm bark beetles burrowing beneath the bark to lay eggs, clogs the tree's water-conducting vessels with a defensive gum the tree itself produces in a doomed attempt to wall off the infection, ultimately starving the crown of water even in the middle of a rainstorm. Infected trees show a telltale pattern of wilting, with individual branches turning yellow and curling into a distinctive shepherd's crook shape while the rest of the canopy still looks perfectly healthy, a warning sign that the disease has already spread through the tree's internal plumbing. A second, more aggressive strain of the fungus emerged decades after the first outbreak and reignited the epidemic across Europe and North America, just as resistant elm breeding programs were finally beginning to make progress, proof that a plant plague defeated once can still return in a deadlier form. Some of the grandest tree-lined avenues in cities across 2 continents were built entirely around the elm's tall, vase-shaped canopy, and losing that species left visibly bare gaps in urban skylines that many of those same cities are still trying to replant nearly a century later. Citrus greening, also called huanglongbing, this bacterial disease has become the single most destructive threat facing citrus growers anywhere in the world, spread by a tiny insect called the Asian citrus psyllid that injects the bacteria directly into a tree's vascular system while feeding. Once inside, the bacteria clog the tree's phloem and starve the roots of nutrients, causing leaves to develop a blotchy, asymmetrical yellowing pattern that looks nothing like ordinary nutrient deficiency. followed by small, bitter, lopsided fruit that stays partially green even at full ripeness, which is exactly how the disease earned its name. There is currently no cure once a tree is infected, and most trees decline and die within a few years of first showing symptoms, forcing growers into an endless cycle of removing infected trees and replanting into an environment where the psyllid vector is still actively spreading. The disease has already devastated citrus production across large parts of the world and continues expanding into new growing regions, and researchers openly acknowledge that at its current rate of spread, it threatens to fundamentally reshape where citrus fruit can even be commercially grown. The Asian citrus psyllid itself is barely larger than a grain of rice, mottled brown and easy to overlook on the underside of a leaf. Yet that single insect, feeding for only a few minutes, is enough to deliver a bacterial infection with no known cure into a tree that may have taken a decade to mature. Panama Disease. Every Cavendish banana sold in a grocery store today is a genetic clone of every other Cavendish banana, a monoculture so uniform that when a fungus finds a way past its defenses, it can spread across an entire continent's plantations with almost nothing standing in its way. That fungus, a soil-dwelling pathogen called Fusarium oxysporum, wiped out the previous dominant banana variety, the Gros Michel, in the mid-20th century, and a newer, more aggressive strain known as Tropical Race 4 has spent the last several decades marching from Asia through the Middle East and into Africa, and more recently, Latin America itself. The fungus infects through the roots and clogs the plant's internal water-conducting tissue, causing leaves to yellow and collapse from the base upward while the fruit stalk withers before ever producing a usable harvest. Once TR4 establishes itself in a field, its spores can persist in the soil for decades, meaning an infected plantation can never safely grow susceptible bananas there again. A slow-motion agricultural crisis playing out right now across some of the most important banana-growing regions left on the planet. Because nearly every export banana on Earth shares the exact same genetic code, there is no natural variation within the crop for the fungus to struggle against, turning what would normally be a contained, manageable outbreak into a threat capable of ending an entire global industry's dependence on a single variety, tobacco mosaic virus. Long before scientists even understood what a virus was, a mysterious agent causing mottled, discolored patches on tobacco leaves was quietly making history, becoming the very first virus ever identified when researchers discovered that its infectious sap could pass through a filter fine enough to block every known bacterium. That virus turned out to be extraordinarily stable, capable of surviving for years in dried plant material and remaining fully infectious the entire time, spreading not through insects or wind but through simple physical contact, a torn leaf, a pair of unwashed pruning shears, or even a gardener's hands moving from one plant to the next. Infected plants develop a blotchy, mottled pattern of light and dark green across their leaves that gives the disease its name, along with stunted growth and, in severe cases, distorted and curled foliage that never fully recovers. Because the virus survives so well outside a living host, it can linger in contaminated soil, tools, and even cigarette tobacco itself, meaning a single careless touch while handling infected material can introduce the virus to an entire greenhouse of otherwise healthy plants. There is still no cure or treatment capable of clearing the virus from an infected plant, and because its rigid, rod-shaped protein shell resists most standard disinfectants, growers are generally left with only one real option: removing and destroying infected plants entirely before the contact spread cycle repeats itself. Powdery mildew. Almost every gardener eventually recognizes the telltale sign of powdery mildew, a fine, white to gray dusting that spreads across leaves and stems as though someone sprinkled flour directly onto the plant. And unlike most fungal diseases, this one thrives in conditions that seem almost too dry to support fungal growth at all. The fungus needs no standing water to germinate, spreading instead through spores carried on the wind that require only humid air and warm, shaded conditions to take hold, which is why plants crowded together with poor air circulation are hit hardest even during a dry spell. Left unchecked, the fungal coating spreads across the entire leaf surface, blocking sunlight and interfering with photosynthesis until infected leaves curl, yellow, and drop early, weakening the plant's growth and fruit production, even though the disease itself rarely kills an established plant outright. New spores can form and spread again within as little as 3 days under the right conditions, meaning a single overlooked infection at the start of summer can blanket an entire garden bed by the time anyone notices the problem has spread beyond 1 or 2 leaves. Roses, squash, cucumbers, and lilacs rank among its favorite targets, and because different powdery mildew species specialize in different host plants, a lawn covered in the fungus poses little direct risk to a nearby vegetable bed even during a heavy outbreak. Root rot. The single most common way a houseplant dies is invisible until it is often too late, unfolding entirely underground where soil-dwelling organisms like Pythium and Phytophthora wait for exactly the conditions that overwatering and poor drainage create. These water mold pathogens thrive in saturated, oxygen-starved soil, infecting root tips and spreading rapidly through tissue that is already stressed and weakened by sitting and standing water, turning firm, pale roots into a dark, mushy, foul-smelling mass within days. The cruelest part of this disease is how closely its above-ground symptoms mimic the opposite problem, since a plant with rotted roots can no longer absorb water at all, causing leaves to wilt and yellow in exactly the pattern gardeners associate with underwatering, which leads many people to respond by watering even more and accelerating the very rot that is killing the plant. By the time drooping leaves make the problem obvious, a significant portion of the root system has usually already been destroyed. And the only way to confirm what is actually happening is to remove the plant from its pot and inspect the roots directly, checking for the telltale shift from firm and pale to dark, slimy, and disintegrating at the slightest touch. A healthy root system smells faintly of soil and nothing else, while roots deep into rot give off a distinct, sour, almost rotten vegetable odor the moment the pot is disturbed, often the very first unmistakable warning sign available before the outer leaves ever show a hint of trouble.